When my husband said the words, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He said it the way people say something they believe is simple truth. I did this alone. We were sitting at the dining table. The same table where I once helped him study late at night. The same table where I folded his work shirts for years. The same table where I quietly set aside my own dreams so his could grow. When he said those words, I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't know what else to do. Inside me, something cracked. Not loudly, not in a way anyone else could hear. It was quiet, the kind of breaking that only happens after years of holding things together. I remember looking at his hands as he spoke. Hands I once held when we had nothing. Hands that trembled with fear when we were young and unsure. Hands that no longer reached for mine. He was telling a story about his success, about how hard he worked, about how many sacrifices he made. People around the table nodded. They smiled at him with pride. No one looked at me. I sat there listening. And suddenly, I felt like a ghost in my own life. I thought of the mornings I woke before sunrise. The nights I stayed awake worrying about bills. The chances I gave up without complaint. None of that mattered now. At least, not enough to be remembered. As he spoke, I realized something painful. He didn't forget my sacrifices by accident. He forgot them because they were quiet. And quiet things are easy to erase. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't correct him. I didn't remind him of who I used to be before everything became about us. Instead, I sat there, still, calm, smiling, because women like me learn early how to swallow pain without making a sound. That night, when everyone left, I washed the dishes alone. The house felt larger, colder, like it no longer knew me. I stood at the sink, watching the water run over my hands, and for the first time in many years, I asked myself a question I was afraid to answer. If he believes he did this alone, then where do I belong now? Before I became the woman who sat quietly at that table, I was someone else. Not louder, not braver, just more seen. I met my husband when we were both young and unsure. We didn't have much then. No savings. No clear plan. Only hope and a promise that we would face life together. I remember the way he used to look at me, like my presence alone made things easier. Like I was part of his strength, not something separate from it. Back then, we shared everything. Dreams, fears, small joys. Even silence felt warm. When we married, I didn't think about sacrifice. I thought about partnership, about building something side by side. We rented a small place. The walls were thin. The furniture was borrowed or secondhand. But we laughed a lot. And when we worried together. He had big plans. He wanted to grow, to succeed, to be respected. I believed in him, not because he asked me to, but because loving him made believing feel natural. When he worked late, I waited up. When he felt unsure, I reminded him who he was. When money was tight, I found ways to stretch what little we had. I didn't keep count. I didn't write anything down. Love at that time didn't feel like something that needed proof. Years passed. Responsibilities grew. Children came. Bills grew heavier. Dreams became more practical. Somewhere along the way, my own plans became later. Later when things were stable. Later when the children were grown. Later when there was time. Later became a habit. I left small pieces of myself behind without making a sound. My interests. My energy. My need to be noticed. I told myself this was normal. That good wives adjust. That strong women don't complain. And for a long time, I was proud of that strength. I became the one who remembered birthdays. The one who kept the house calm. The one who made sure meals appeared on time. I became reliable. Invisible. Necessary, but rarely thanked. My husband worked harder as the years passed. And I supported him harder too. When he succeeded, I felt relief. Like my efforts had finally paid off. But something slowly changed. The way he spoke about his work. The way decisions were made without asking me. The way my opinions were met with silence instead of conversation. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It happened in small moments. Moments easy to excuse. Moments easy to forgive. I told myself he was tired. I told myself he was under pressure. I told myself love sometimes grows quiet. But deep inside, something felt different. I wasn't being hurt. I was being forgotten. And forgetting doesn't leave bruises. It leaves emptiness. I stayed busy. Busy women don't have time to feel lonely. I stayed kind. Kind women don't demand recognition. I stayed quiet. Quiet women don't disturb success. But silence has a cost. And I didn't realize how much I had paid. Until the day my husband said those words out loud, the distance didn't arrive loudly. It didn't knock on the door or announce itself. It slipped in quietly, like dust settling on furniture no one touches anymore. At first it was small things. He stopped asking how my day was. Not because he didn't care, I told myself, but because he was busy. He spoke more about work, meetings, decisions, achievements. I listened, nodded, smiled. When I tried to share something about myself, his eyes drifted. Not unkindly, just elsewhere. I learned to shorten my stories. Then I stopped telling them at all. At family gatherings, people praised him. They spoke about his success, his hard work, his journey. I stood beside him, smiling, proud. No one mentioned me, and I didn't expect them to, but I noticed something strange. He didn't mention me either. When someone asked how he managed everything, he said, "I worked very hard." That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I waited for him to add something else to a small pause. A glance in my direction. It never came. On the drive home, the car was quiet. I watched the streetlights pass, one after another. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how. How do you explain a feeling that has no sharp edge? No clear moment of harm? So I stayed silent. Silence had become familiar, like an old sweater. Worn. Comfortable in a sad way. Over time, decisions started happening without me. Plans made. Money moved. Commitments accepted. I would hear about them afterward. Casually. Like they didn't require my voice. When I asked questions, he answered politely. Briefly. Not angry. Not cruel. Just distant. There were moments I sat at the kitchen table, watching him scroll on his phone, and wondered when I had stopped being someone he talked to and become someone he updated. At night, lying beside him, I listened to his breathing. Steady. Untroubled. I stared at the ceiling. My thoughts loud in the quiet room. I remembered how we used to talk about everything. Even nothing. Especially nothing. Now, the space between us felt wide. Even though we were inches apart, I tried small things. Cooking his favorite meals. Asking about his past dreams. Reminding him gently of shared memories. He smiled. He thanked me. But the connection didn't return. It was like knocking on a door that no longer led to the same room. One evening, we attended a gathering together. People asked him about his journey. He stood tall, confident, comfortable in praise. And then he said it. Not sharply, not proudly, just simply. I did this alone. The room stayed warm. People nodded. But something inside me went cold. I felt myself shrink. Not because of anger, but because of a deep, quiet hurt. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I smiled. But inside, something began to crack. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to change everything. Those words followed me home. I did this alone. They repeated in my mind while I washed dishes, while I folded laundry, while I lay awake beside him. I tried to push them away. Told myself I was being too sensitive. That maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. But words don't need bad intentions to cause pain. They only need to erase truth. The next morning, I looked at him across the table. He read the paper like any other day. Calm. Unaware. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to hear him say he hadn't forgotten me. But fear held my tongue. Fear of being told it wasn't important. Fear of learning the answer. Days passed. The feeling stayed. I noticed how often he spoke about my sacrifices at work. Long hours. Stress. Pressure. Never ours. Never mine. It was as if my life had become the background music to his story. Necessary but not named. One afternoon, I found an old box while cleaning a closet. Letters. Photos. Receipts from years when we had nothing. There I was, smiling in every picture, standing just behind him.
He remembered notes he stayed awake wearing.
So he could sleep peacefully. Jobs I turned down because his career came first. Moments I swallowed my needs so our home could stay calm. None of it felt bitter back then. It felt like love. But love needs remembering. And I realized something painful. He didn't forget my sacrifices overnight. He forgot them slowly. Because I never reminded him they existed. That evening, when he came home, I didn't greet him with the usual smile. I didn't raise my voice either. I simply said, "Can we talk?" He looked surprised. Not annoyed. Just unprepared. We sat at the table where so many meals had been shared in silence. I told him how his words stayed with me. How hearing, "I did this alone," felt like being erased. He listened. Quietly. When I finished, he said something I didn't expect. "I never thought you felt that way." Not denial. Not apology. Just realization. And in that moment, I understood something else. Silence doesn't protect love. It slowly starves it. He hadn't seen my pain.
Because I
had learned to hide it well. We sat there for a long time.
No shouting. No tears.
Just the sound of rain outside. And the truth finally between us. That night didn't fix everything. But it changed the direction. Because once something is spoken, it can no longer be ignored. After that night, something shifted between us. Not suddenly. Not perfectly. But enough to notice. The next morning, he made the tea. He hadn't done that in years. It wasn't an apology. Just a small gesture. But small gestures matter when they come from awareness. We didn't talk much that day. And strangely, that was okay. The silence felt different now. Not heavy. Just thoughtful. In the days that followed, he began to pause before speaking. Before saying I, he sometimes said we. Not every time. But often enough to tell me he was trying. I noticed he asked my opinion again. About plans. About money. About simple things like dinner or weekend visits. At first, I answered carefully. As if my voice had grown and used to being heard. But slowly, I found it again. One evening, he said something that stayed with me. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly." It wasn't said with drama. Just quietly. Almost to himself. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. We talked more after that. About the past. About how we both lost parts of ourselves while trying to survive life. He spoke about pressure. About fear of failure. About how success became something he clung to. I spoke about loneliness. About shrinking myself. About how being strong for everyone else made me disappear. Neither of us blamed, that we simply listened. There were moments of sadness. Moments of regret. But also moments of understanding. I realized something important during that time. My worth was never dependent on his recognition. But love does need acknowledgement to stay alive. I began doing small things for myself again. Sitting quietly with a book. Calling old friends. Allowing myself rest without guilt. And he noticed. Not because I announced it, but because I stopped disappearing. Our marriage didn't become perfect, but it became honest. And honesty, even when it arrives late, is still a gift. We learned to speak before silence turned heavy. To think before forgetting became habit. I learned that sacrifice should never require self-erasure. And he learned that success built on quiet support still carries the fingerprints of love. I don't tell this story because everything turned perfect. Life doesn't work that way. Love doesn't either. I tell it because I learned something important. After many years of staying quiet, I learned that giving does not mean disappearing, and love does not mean being forgotten. For a long time, I believed that being strong meant saying nothing, that being a good wife meant carrying weight silently. That recognition was something you didn't ask for. But I was wrong. Not because sacrifice is bad, but because sacrifice without voice slowly becomes loneliness. I also learned that people don't always forget on purpose. Sometimes they forget because silence makes forgetting easy. My husband didn't wake up one day and decide to erase me. He simply kept moving forward, while I stayed behind, holding everything together. And I let him. Speaking up didn't make me weak. It didn't undo the years I gave. It gave those years meaning again. Now, when I sit at the table, I take up my space. Not loudly, just fully. We still have quiet days, but the quiet feels shared. If you are listening to this and see yourself somewhere in my story,
I want you to know something.
your sacrifices mattered. Even if no one named them, even if no one thanked you yet, it is never too late to remind the world and yourself that love should never require you to disappear. You deserve to be remembered while you are still here.